Okay, I hope your brains are getting thoroughly melted because now we're going to take a trip down memory lane. 1963's calling. Open the door. Let's go on down that hole. Now, there was a lot of good research done by a guy named the Dark Journalist, and his channel still should be up. And I learned a lot of interesting things from him. And if y'all get a chance, you should sub to his channel. He does some really good, interesting things. Now, I don't agree with him on everything. Of course, I don't agree with everybody on it. I don't agree with one person 100% on anything. And if anybody agreed with me 100%, I would run from. So take that as food for thought. Now, to the Kennedys, it's a real interesting thing how so many things circle back to the Kennedys, even right now. So, what do I mean by that? Well, Kennedy was now looking back, in my opinion, Kennedy was the original coup of America, where they killed Kennedy in Dallas, my hometown, and left a stain on this city I would very much love to see be righted. Because I just hate that he died here. But Cody, he's on the line with us, and he has some good information because he was older at the time and kind of was, around during that time. But he knows just obvious different nuggets that we don't get to hear about. But putting kind of a timeline together on Kennedy, and I had some good notes, but I can't find them, so it's just off the top of my head. Kennedy, he was in the military. And once he got out of the military, he was one of the youngest members in Congress. Well, that was right about the time of the Roswell thing hit, and he was one of the youngest members in Congress to sit on the intel briefings to talk about that. Well, kind of fast forward from that time that Kennedy, he obviously knew about the CIA and how rogue they were. And the CIA used to be, well, you could go back to the Dark Journalist and he can kind of refresh you on that one. Because I don't want to get names and dates wrong or anything, but basically the CIA was taken over by Alan Dulles. And Cody knows a whole lot more about Dulles than I can elaborate about. But that effectively was the first coup. And there's so many things about the assassination that even ties Sidney Powell into it. And how that works out is Sidney Powell was a prosecutor in Texas. Her law office was in Texas at the time. And she was a federal prosecutor. Well, she's also overturned like 70 cases in federal court up to the Supreme Court level. So she was a real powerhouse, and she was prosecuting one of the guys that was a shooter because there was some drug cartel, I can't remember his name, drug gang member. He got busted. So he wanted to get the judge whacked in his case, which he did get successfully accomplished by hiring a gunslinger. And this guy happened to be Charles Harrelson, which is Woody Harrelson's dad. And he was also fingered here in Dallas as one of the people during the Kennedy assassination, caught on a photo. And even the drug dealer said when they used to sit around and get drunk, do cocaine, that Charles Harrelson admitted he was one of the shooters in the Kennedy assassination. Well, Sidney Powell prosecuted that guy. And all of a sudden, all the information just kind of went away about it. But you don't think she probably knew about that? Now, fast forward to today, and all the strange things that are happening that are very mysterious. But Cody, why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about what you kind of remember about some of that and whatever nuggets you may have on Kennedy?
Yeah, in my book, Choosing the Light, Dark Secrets of the Oklahoma City Bombing, I have a section about Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy, Sirhan Sirhan, and Martin Luther King. And the premise behind it is that during the 60s, that whole decade with all those political assassinations, that was a time when our country was taken away from the people. And it was turned over basically to the deep state. And that's what we think Trump is trying to fight now, 57, 60 years later. But I was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, and that story's in the book. But the thing about it is, I stood where Oswald stood in the book depository, and I was with a World War II security guard guy. And there's no way that shot could be made. I believe there was a conspiracy there, and I write about that in the book. And we also talk about Apex 1B, it's CIA document 1035-960, concerning criticism of the Warren Report. Now, a lot of people have never heard about that, but it was a CIA internal document, and it talked about all the fallacies of the Warren Report. Kennedy fired Allen Dulles, who was director of CIA, and a guy named William Bissell, who was his number 2 in command. And Bissell had the Cuban Bay of Pigs situation. He was commanding it, and it soured up, and Kennedy was going to disband the CIA, and he fired Bissell, and he fired Dulles. And then later on, they put Allen Dulles, the guy Kennedy fired, director of CIA, on the Warren Commission. So the CIA document 1035-960, that's the one that went through all the internal stuff in the CIA, and most people have never heard of it. And so there was a massive cover-up. I think John Kennedy was one of our last freely elected presidents. He won a narrow margin from Richard Nixon, who'd been the vice president in the Eisenhower administration. He won it by about 100,000 votes. And back then, Scott, they didn't have all these Dominion voting machines and election rigging and electronic stuff like they do now. So I think that was a pretty fair vote. It was very close. The country was divided back then like it is now. But they murdered Kennedy. And the shadow government took basic control of our country. And then later on June the 5th, 1968, his brother Robert Kennedy had just won the Democratic California's presidential primary election night. He was shot there in Los Angeles at the Ambassador Hotel. And so that was also a lone gunman. It was a Palestinian activist named Sirhan Bashra Sirhan. People today just call him Sirhan Sirhan. But it was an amazing cover-up that dealt with Manny Pena, who had come out of retirement. He headed up the special unit to investigate RFK's assassination. He was a senator, but he was also working for the CIA's Agency for International Development. And so that's known to CIA insiders. They call it AID. That's the Department of Dirty Tricks. And AID cover-up units specialize in black ops assassination techniques. And so when you go through the whole thing, I have a whole chapter in my book about Sirhan Sirhan and how there was a guy named Alberto Di Salvo, he worked on, that was the Boston Strangler. There's Dr. William Joseph Bryan. He was the world's leading expert on hypnosis, and he went to Sirhan Sirhan and checked him out to see if he'd been hypnotized and all. But then he was found dead, mysteriously, right in the middle of the investigation. And so it looked like a cover-up of a cover-up. But the CIA's MK-Ultra mind control program was in full swing during this time. And many people think that Robert Kennedy was murdered by a CIA mind-controlled assassin, a Manchurian candidate in the name of Sirhan Sirhan. So I have a bunch of stuff in the book with stuff from Jolene West, who was a doctor for the CIA's MK-Ultra program. He was sent into the prison where Sirhan Sirhan was after he'd been convicted of killing Robert Kennedy. And Dr. Jolene West, by the way, Scott, was later sent days after the Murrah building bombing in April 19th of 1995, and his job was to assess the psychological effects of that bombing on the civilian population. So what Dr. Julian West was doing in that prison with Sirhan Sirhan was basically seeing how the CIA's mind control of Sirhan Sirhan was breaking down, because it has to be reinforced. And after he got convicted and put in that prison, the CIA couldn't really get in there and check their programming. So he was sent in there. So there's a lot of stuff like this. And then Martin Luther King, that was April the 4th, 1968. He was shot on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. That's another whole lone gunman thing. First you had Lee Harvey Oswald, then you have Sirhan Sirhan, then you have James Earl Ray, the lone gunman. And it's a classic CIA pattern where they do an assassination, they lay it off on a lone gunman, and then he takes the blame for it and everybody walks away. But a lot of people don't know, Scott, in 1999, the King family brought a civil suit against the U.S. government in Memphis. And they convinced a jury, and they won the lawsuit. And in the verdict, it says, I got a quote from it right here, known and unknown members of the U.S. government conspired to kill Martin Luther King. That's a direct quote from the lawsuit and the civil suit. And they awarded the King family $1 because of all this new information that had been turned out. That was in 1999. He was killed in 1968. So it took 31 years to get all this classified stuff out and all this stuff that had been hidden. So anyway, we think that Martin Luther King and John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, they were all leaders, and they were leaders of the people. Dr. King was beloved. Many people loved him for standing up for black rights and civil rights. And the CIA was afraid that the anti-draft movement would unite with the civil rights movement. And if they did, they'd be too powerful to control. So they killed Martin Luther King, which was the leader of the civil rights movement. And all this was taking power away from the people, taking it away from the people and giving it to the deep state. And so for now, for 57, 60 years, we're seeing Donald Trump now trying to get, drain the swamp. He's trying to get all this election fraud and all this corruption of the pedophile rating stuff out in public. And they're fighting tooth and toe now, right now. But they've had a free reign for about 50 or 60 years now. But I believe that in the 60s, that whole decade, I was alive back then, and I remember all this stuff. I think that's when the deep state and the shadow government took over our country, and then they left it in place. Democrat-Republican paradigm for all the people to believe that they had free elections and that they had a say in our government. And I'll give you one example before I shut up. Bill Clinton and George Bush. In that election between those two, George Bush was the deep state. He was director of CIA. He was director of CIA when they came to recruit me in 1975. And so he was playing the Republican mask. And Bill Clinton, of course, is deep state. He was working for the CIA too, and he wore the Democrat mask. So the American people saw the standard fight between Democrat and Republican. The whole time, the deep state controlled both of them. And I think that's something Donald Trump's trying to break up now, and we wish him well, because this is a very powerful cabal, the military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned us about before he left office. And so this is what we're facing, and these are my opinions, and I write about them in my book. So what do you think about all that?
Well, I think what we have to do is deconstruct all this stuff, and that's what a lot of anons have been doing. Everybody that's doing research, you're basically an anon. You're anonymously looking in and doing research, and then you post it up on the internet, and then people gather this stuff that's relevant and start packaging it together. And if you start deconstructing some of this stuff, look at the ties, okay? Because this is all about the coup, the original coup. President Kennedy was a coup. It was a coup against the government, and they had to take Kennedy out in order to complete the crime. And they did. But who were these players in the crime? Oswald, he was ex-military in the Marines. But where did he come from before? He was Civil Air Patrol. Now, what's really interesting is the guy that recruited him in the Civil Air Patrol was also ex-military. His brother was Admiral Byrd, the same Admiral Byrd that went down to Antarctica after the Germans supposedly fled the war. But we imported half the Germans through Operation Paperclip. And Operation Paperclip, where did they go? Half of them went and started NASA, Warner von Braun, and the other half went to the CIA to keep their MK Ultra plans going. And they were still working and using them. And our government imported that, if not straight up funded it from the very beginning. And I'm saying they funded Hitler because Bush's grandpa, I forget, something Bush, anyway, he was the one that was funding Hitler. That's why they had to create Trading with the Enemies Act in order to shut down this Bush from funding Hitler. This is all documented history. But back to Oswald, he was basically brought in to this whole thing. And he was set up from the very beginning. He didn't even know it. In fact, he thought when he came back to Texas that he was going to get a job at NASA. That's what he was being told. Little did he know, he was set up as a patsy to take the fall. And then you look at the guy that owned the building where Oswald was shot, is the same Admiral Byrd's brother that was the Civil Air Patrol guy that recruited Oswald. He just happened to own the book depository building. Now we're talking a conspiracy because Bush is fingered there. He's in photos there. There's all these other mysterious people that were there. And what did they do? They covered it all up. But they had to install certain people in certain positions that were compromised in order to do it. And they had to whack the other ones to shut them up, aka Oswald. Because he was screaming, I was a patsy. I'm a patsy. And he sure enough was. But tying this all together, going back to the Kennedys, everything seems to go back to the Kennedys. And it's real ironic. That's why I keep saying this stuff and, repeating it, because people don't hear it the first time. That's why we got to say it, several times over and over. It's like, look at all these connections here. Connect the dots. Yeah, that was a saying I didn't invent the damn words, just used them. And it became really popular because now you're starting to piece the puzzle together and pay attention. And as these things start connecting, it's not a coincidence anymore.
No, it's the same pattern, Scott, over and over and over. It's just like Oswald was the patsy. McVeigh was the patsy there in Oklahoma City. The Saudi hijackers were the patsy for 9/11. In Martin Luther King's assassination, there was a guy named Bill Pepper. He was an attorney, practices law in both the UK and the US. He wrote a book called An Act of State, The Execution of Martin Luther King. And he showed in that book, documented highly, by the way, that there were approximately 70 witnesses that were known and unknown members of the U.S. government, which were tied to a special military intelligence unit that helped carry out this assassination. And when King lay dying on the balcony of that Lorraine motel, there was a CIA agent named Merrill McCullough. He was a black guy. He was the first black CIA agent. He was standing right there beside Martin Luther King after he got hit. And he had infiltrated a black power group called the Invaders. And he was actually a member of that Invader group. And he was staffing the security detail for King. So there were so many ties into the CIA and into the military and intelligence unit. Like on April 4th of 1968, there was a guy named Sergeant Green, and he was on the fire station roof, which overlooked the Lorraine Motel where King was shot. And he was active in the 112th Military Intelligence Unit at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. So all of these things, whether it's Oswald, whether it's James Earl Ray, whether it's Sirhan, it's all the same pattern. The pattern is they kill one of our guys, they lay it off on a patsy, problem, reaction, solution. What's the solution? The deep state gets more power. And it's time now that we stopped, we stopped believing them. Because I think here in the next few days, Scott, they're going to do kind of the same thing. They'll set off a dirty bomb, they'll do something, and then they'll turn around and blame it on Trump or blame it on the Patriots or whatever. None of us know what's going to happen, and we're in really strange times. But this is a tried and true technique, is to create a assassination or a false flag, lay it off on a patsy, and then glean the political capital that results from it.
Well, this is why it's real important for everybody. You're already conditioned to stay home. So just stay home, relax, get back and relax for the next, 7 or 8 days. And that way, if it is anything that was to pop off, they can't blame it on a patriot because they're all at the house, kicking back, guarding their house. And that's what y'all need to think about. I'm sitting here guarding my place. I ain't out running up and down the streets. That's easy to get something pinned on you for. Why do you want to do that? Stay home, guard your place, enjoy the time. So you got to outsmart these people. Don't put yourself in the positions where you could be compromised, because that's how they like to blame things on people. So everybody's home. Well, they certainly can't blame patriots for it. They're not out there in the mass running around. But this is the coup, the original coup. They attempted to do it again, and Trump is not going to let them get away with it. And the military knows all this stuff. Everybody's been pissed off ever since they blew Kennedy's head off here in Dallas. They knew there was a coup, and the coup had occurred right then in front of everybody. Now it's time to write it off. And Trump could come out and declass all this crap and just do a data dump on people. And there will be so much revelation about things to come and things that have been hid from the people all this time. So it's time for a declass. It's time for people are ready for the information. They're getting hungry for it. They've been hungry for it. That's why people are watching these videos, because they want to hear the truth. The truth resonates with every cell in your body. Your body will naturally recoil from a lie. That's just human physics. So when we're telling you the truth, it resonates with every cell in your body. So this is the original coup, and we're riding the coup, and Trump is going to set it all straight, and the military is making damn sure it's going to happen. That is going to be the revelation for people to see. So keep a strong mind, a strong heart, put some steel in your backbone, kick back, eat more popcorn, and watch the show. You're living in the greatest history of time right now. You don't know how things are going to work out. I don't know. Cody doesn't know. But all we know is too many things are lining up to be a coincidence. There are no coincidences in this time frame. You are in the greatest history of time, and it will be written, and your kids will know about it.